So what I want to do here is run over the secret origin of Tony Stark. And the reason why is because what Bendis is doing with Invincible Iron Man from All New, All Different Marvel is basing Tony Stark on this particular origin story and moving forward with a series that stands alone from the previously existing Iron Man titles. And so what we're going to do is jump into why this story was made, transition to the origin story itself, and then wrap around to the events that led to the revelation in the first place. And so, while this might seem a little weird, bear with me here, and I think it'll all make sense at the end. So the secret origin of Tony Stark comes out of Iron Man Volume 5, issues number 10 through 17, as part of the Marvel Now line of comics. Written by Kieron Gillen, during a 2013 interview with Comic Book Resources, he had stated that the idea of rewriting Tony Stark's origin story was twofold. The first was that the Iron Man comic was celebrating its 50th year, and as a result, Marvel was looking for a way to retell his story in a way that would appeal to newer audiences. And the second was to introduce a more compelling dynamic in the form of Tony Stark's brother Arno and redefine Tony's relationship with his parents. In addition to this, because the event of Avengers vs. X-Men was taking place at this time, Marvel wanted a way to introduce these concepts without contradicting the Avengers vs. X-Men conflict. And to this end, Kieron Gillen initiated the events of Secret Origins by having Tony Stark take to outer space in an effort to explore its furthest regions as a way to prepare himself for the various threats that may endanger the Earth. And so with issue number 7, Kieron introduced a Rigellian recorder named 451. As a series of robots created by a highly advanced race called the Rigellians, who operated as colonizers of worlds during the early age of the universe, the recorders were created to function similarly to the Watcher in that they explored new territories and reported back to their masters on the nature of the explored area's inhabitants and the level of difficulty in colonization. However, while the recorders were normally wiped of their memories and sent back into space to continue the process of exploration, 451 was a recorder whose memory was not wiped and as a result began to develop a personality of his own. Defecting from the Rigellians, he began the process of exploring the universe for the purpose of expanding on his own understanding of existence. Operating as a guide of sorts, what Marvel does here is provide us with the backstory of 451 in terms of its knowledge about Tony Stark and why it took a particular interest in him during this story. So the secret origin of Tony Stark initially picks up with Howard and Maria Stark. What we're told here is that the two are around 3 months pregnant, and while Marvel doesn't explicitly come out and say it, the context of their conversation regarding the issues they've been through indicate that they've tried to have a child several times before, but have failed each time. This is something that's compounded on when the two meet with their doctor to follow up on the pregnancy and are informed that the baby will likely not make it to term, and if it did, the child they would receive is not the child that they want. Now, whether this means that the baby would be born with birth defects or die during the birthing process is never explained, but for Howard Stark, the inability to produce a child with his wife is really a central part of his self-definition. What I mean here is that for Howard, the desire to pass on his lineage is a driving force behind who he is as a person and how he defines himself as a man. In his eyes, the inability to have a child with his wife, despite his vast influence, power, and wealth, lead him to believe that on a fundamental level, he simply failed as both a man and a husband. Now, what Kieron Gillen does here is provide us with a measure of desperation on behalf of Howard Stark, and then he takes a kind of Doctor Strange approach here. Where the origin of Dr. Stephen Strange saw him visiting various doctors and specialists following his car accident and the damage to his hands, Howard Stark visits some of the greatest minds on Earth in an effort to find someone who can help his situation. The reason why is because Maria suffers from an illness which has complicated her pregnancy, and while the baby has lasted 3 months, Howard is looking for someone who could ensure that the baby will be born after 9 months in a healthy manner. As a result, something like artificial insemination would result in the same problem that they're currently facing. And so while various individuals like the High Evolutionary has stated that they are essentially unable to provide Howard with the answers that he seeks, hope does come in the form of a shady individual named Mr. Rollo in a seedy bar in Las Vegas. Revealing himself to be a member of an alien race called the Greys, a group created explicitly for this comic and survives by scavenging for technology of other societies, Rollo agrees to help Howard, but only under the condition that Howard helps him in return. What Rollo says is that at some point he and his group came into contact with 451 on Earth. While they tried to access the information stored within him as a way to expand on and ensure their survival, 451 refused to provide them with this information and simply just shut down. Unable to access it, the Greys kept 451 under lock and key until such a time as they could download all of this information. However, while walking through the ship, 451 simply woke up and in the process offered Rollo the opportunity to turn against his boss in exchange for data that would be worth a fortune. Taking the opportunity, Rollo was provided with a list of names by 451, one of whom was Howard Stark. And so seeing the vast information within 451 as a way to possibly cure his wife and bear a child, Howard Stark agrees to help Rollo. Forming a team composed of minor Marvel characters including Dum Dum Dugan, the former right-hand man of Nick Fury and a Howling Commando during World War II, as well as Thunderbolt Ross prior to his promotion to General Ross, in addition to Nessa the Kitten, the group functioned similar to Ocean's 11 in that they each had an area of expertise, including demolitions, espionage, and security, and would work with Rollo to free 451 from his captivity. With Rollo acting as a decoy for his boss by pitching a story that he was involved in a deal that had gone south, Howard Stark and his team break into the office of Rollo's boss and begin to break 451 out. However, once Rollo's boss begins to realize what's happening, he makes the argument that if what Rollo says is true, then his stupidity has cost the Greys a valuable robot, and if Rollo is lying, then he should be eliminated. Either way, Rollo's boss kills him as he saw Rollo to be more of a liability than anything else. And so with 451 freed, the story transitions to Howard and Maria Stark in their mansion during a conversation with 451. As it explains, it has knowledge to ensure that their child is born healthy. But the problem is that because this is taking place during the time period occurring with the rise of the X-Men and the superpower teams of the Avengers and the Fantastic Four as well as Spider-Man, various alien empires have begun to recognize the threat that Earth is beginning to become. What 451 says is that in 30 years, alien civilizations will stop viewing Earth out of curiosity and begin viewing it out of fear, and that at some point, they will destroy humanity in an effort to keep mutants and superpowered people from expanding into space. In an effort to keep this from happening, 451 sought to modify the baby of Howard and Maria by enhancing it with an aptitude for technological advancement that would help humanity evolve at a much faster rate and ensure its survival once alien races began to pose a threat. Assembling a genetic code that would merge with the baby, once it reached maturity, the child would possess knowledge in all forms of technology covered in the database of 451. Its brain would be at a maximum of the human potential in terms of intelligence. Practicality would take precedence over a sense of wonder, meaning that the child would never view something as impossible to achieve, and finally, the child would derive inspiration from viewing unfamiliar objects and develop new technologies from existing ones. However, what the story also reveals is that when Howard and Maria were provided with the option of allowing the genetic modification of their child to occur, the two silently exchanged their thoughts on whether or not 451 should be trusted. From the perspective of both Howard and Maria, 451 offered the best chance for the two to give birth to a son, but using his knowledge of technology, Howard Stark intended to secretly analyze the genetic modification provided by 451 in an effort to ensure that it wasn't lying. But during his investigations, Howard Stark discovered that within the genetic code was a suicide gene that would allow their son to grow until he was around the age of 32 years old, at which point he would simply die. Seeking to keep this from happening, Howard Stark developed a solution that would counter this suicide gene, allowing their son to benefit from the genetic modification without having his lifespan cut short. However, once the child was born, it began to demonstrate an inability to breathe on its own, and when Howard and Maria traveled to their local doctor for a diagnosis of the problem, the doctor had told them that while he didn't know what the cause of the problem was, the prognosis was that the baby would never be able to breathe on its own again. Revealing to Maria that he had discovered 451's lie and secretly fed her a solution to disrupt the suicide gene, Howard reasoned that because he wasn't 100% familiar with the ramifications of his actions, that this issue may have been a fallout of his act. And while Maria expressed an anger towards Howard for both keeping her in the dark as well as betraying her trust, in the end, the two decided that the only thing they could do was keep the child hidden from the world and 451, since it was unknown how it would react to learning that Howard had modified its work. And so faced with the truth of his history, the story transitions to Tony Stark searching through the various documents of his father's life in an effort to locate the truth of what he's seen. Arriving at the Maria Stark Foundation Hospice for the Dying, Marvel introduces Tony Stark's brother Arno for the very first time. During their discussion, Tony reveals that he had listened to his father's words over and over again, and while the situation was a lot to take in at one time, In the end, he had come to the realization that Arno was a biological son born to Howard and Maria with modified genes allowing for him to be a genius, while Tony Stark had actually been adopted as a way to keep Arno hidden and allow the world to believe that Howard and Maria's son grew up fine. Now, where the reaction of Tony Stark is a bit of a shock here in that he's effectively facing a brother that he never knew that he had, for Arno, it's the opposite. Now, whether it's due to his genetic structure in terms of being a genius or the fact that he's meeting a member of his family for the first time, the attitude from Arno is one of both excitement and elation in that he's been confined to a room hidden from the world and now has the opportunity to bring his ideas to the open in an effort to make the world a better place. Now, in terms of this particular story and the events that led up to it, the entire situation of Tony Stark's secret origin, as Kieran Gillen had wrote it, came about due to a long-term plan that 451 had arranged. Because various alien races would view humanity as a threat, the goal of 451 was to lead Tony Stark to something called the God Killer armor. Created by a race called the Aspirants at the dawn of time in an effort to destroy the Celestials, the Aspirants fell into a civil war and were destroyed by the Celestials during their own conflict. However, the God Killer armor remained and was sought by 451 as a way to ensure the survival of Earth by placing it in the hands of Tony Stark, since it was the belief of 451 that humanity was the key to bringing peace to the universe. However, once it was revealed that Tony Stark was not the biological son of Howard and Maria Stark, 451 sought to ensure that the God Killer armor would not fall into the hands of anyone who would seek to destroy Earth. To this end, 451 sent the God Killer armor to another dimension, intending to take himself and Tony Stark along with it, and in the process, Tony Stark hacked into 451's technology and saved himself from being pulled into the other dimension. And so once 451 was effectively destroyed, this allowed Tony Stark the opportunity to travel and meet Arno for the very first time, and for Arno to live out in the world without fear of 451 tracking him down one day. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. I hope this made sense. I know this was a little shaky, but this is really just kind of how the origin story is being given to us in terms of the all-new, all-different version of Iron Man and what Bendis is pulling from before Secret Wars. With that being said, I will catch you guys later. Peace.